Hello and welcome to another interview on TV. You're watching Brookline Interactive Group. I'm Representative Tommy Vitolo. I've got a great guest today, Alan Khazei, a candidate for the 4th Congressional District, one of many. And I can't wait to really get into it and hear from Alan about all sorts of things. Alan is not new to the campaign trail, either this time around or in the past. And I'm sure he's going to tell us about that. But Alan, welcome, and we're going to get started the way we always do. Tell us what you've been doing between, say, birth and 2019.
Well, Tommy, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me. So I think important things to know about me, first of all, is that I'm a father. My daughter Mirabelle is 18. She just graduated from Brookline High School. She's heading off to Northeastern in the fall. We're very proud of her. That was her top choice. My son Reese just finished 6th grade at the Lincoln Public School here in Brookline. And then also that I'm married to an extraordinary woman, Vanessa Kirsch, who's a serial social entrepreneur and also has dedicated her life to public service. So birth, the other very important thing about me is that the values that my parents raised me with. I'm the son of immigrants. On my mother's side, like you, my mother was Italian. And she was a classic Italian. She loved everyone. My great-grandparents came from Ancona. My great-grandfather, Augusto Mantini, was a coal miner. So my Italian family settled in Western Pennsylvania, a small town called Katanning, where I was born and lived the first few years of my life. And I got a chance to meet my great-grandparents. My great-grandfather worked with John L. Lewis to help create the Coal Miners Union. And we heard stories about, the fights and what it took to do that. My grandparents, John and Tina Picardi, were small business people. They owned a corner store, a shoe shop, and they brought me up with just incredible love. My mom was the wisest person I've ever known. She taught me the most important thing I've ever learned, which is that everyone has a special gift to give, and you bring that out by loving them. And my mom loved fearlessly. She was a nurse. She was a nurse anesthetist and a school nurse. And if she were alive now, I know, first of all, she'd be back in the hospitals, helping to take care of people, because that's the way she was. She'd also have a hard time because her instinct when she met someone was to look them in the eye, figure out how they were beautiful inside as well as out, and hug them. So she'd be having a hard time during COVID. My dad was an immigrant from Iran. He left a country of dictatorship, inspired by a country of freedom. And even as a little boy, he said, Alan, America is a beacon to the world. I came here because of our ideals of liberty and democracy and equality of opportunity, and most of all, justice for all. And my dad was a doctor. He was a surgeon, an oncologist. He did a lot of free care. He was on the board of the American Cancer Society for more than 3 decades. And it was really the values that my parents raised me with that led me to choose a life of public service.
So that brings us to a more recent decision. You decided to get into this race when Congressman Kennedy announced he was not going to run for re-election. You jumped in with both feet. Tell us about that decision and why you knew this was the right time for you.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, I've spent my life in public service. I started a program called City Year back 32 years ago with my best friend from college, my roommate, Michael Brown. And we realized then that the system wasn't working for everyone, that we needed to get more people involved. So we said, why don't we create a model for national service that would inspire young people to come together from all different backgrounds, working side by side, using their energy and idealism to fight poverty, to fix schools, to support our seniors and our veterans, to take care of our environment. We started with 50 young people, and we started to build a movement. We became the model for the AmeriCorps program. And I had the chance to work closely with Senator Kennedy for 20 years, work closely with President Clinton on developing AmeriCorps, work closely with President Obama on growing AmeriCorps, but also with John McCain and Senator Hatch, really reaching across the aisle to help tap people power to get Congress to act. And that was really my motivation getting into this race. I've either founded or co-founded 9 nonprofit organizations, all with the same theme of empowering people to engage in our democracy. So when Congressman Kennedy decided to challenge Senator Markey, my wife and I talked about it and said, here's a chance now, especially with Trump as president, especially with all of the movement energy that's happening in the country. I was very involved with March for Our Lives, helping to create the Boston March, building something called the Sister March Network that knitted all the marches together. I was very involved with the Women's March, with the Gun Safety March, March for Our Lives, building the Sibling March Network. And so I said, this is a time of movement politics. It's a time where we have to restore the values that my parents raised me with. And so I decided to jump into the race.
And of course, there's been some really shocking, unexpected events in 2020 that have absolutely shaped the race for all the candidates. Of course, the COVID outbreak, followed by the murder of George Floyd, and the sudden and urgent rise or re-emphasis on the Black Lives Matter movement. Clearly, both of these things are having a tremendous impact on our society and on our politics, and I would expect on our candidates. So tell us about how you're thinking about COVID and BLM in the present tense.
Well, I think, Tommy, that it gives me an even greater sense of urgency to try to serve in Congress. My whole life has been about service, but we are facing an unprecedented historical moment, unlike we've ever had before, because as you just mentioned, we have three major crises all converging. The COVID health crisis, which has led to this economic crisis, the worst economy since the Great Depression. And now we have this extraordinary racial justice awakening in response to the brutal murder of George Floyd and others. What's inspiring to me, while we have an administration in Washington that has made everything worse, more than 158,000 people have needlessly lost their lives. The way the American people are responding should give us all hope. From the workers we've now realized are essential, the healthcare workers like my mom and dad, grocery store clerks, sanitation workers, school teachers who figure out how to teach our kids online, and more. And now we've had 70 straight days, more than 30 million Americans in every neighborhood, community, city, and hamlet in this country have come together to say we must confront this history of systemic racism. And so I'm even more motivated. I think we're entering a New Deal moment. And with a new administration and a new Congress, I think we're going to be able to do big, bold, transformational things that we could have only dreamed of 5 months ago, because that's what it's going to take to really fight the crises all together. And so I think it's a very unique opportunity. It gives me even more motivation to try and push a big agenda to meet that New Deal moment.
You're clearly a big ideas guy, and you're recognizing that now is an opportunity for big ideas. So tell us more about them. What are you talking about when maybe it would be interesting to talk about what should be happening in 2020, but in some sense, for this conversation, I'm more interested in 2021 when we're talking about Congressman Khazei. What is he pushing for? How is he seizing this opportunity with big ideas? What big ideas are we talking about?
Well, absolutely. And again, my approach, what I've learned, Tommy, is that it's not about me. It's about us. And it's about how do you tap the energy of the people to get Congress to act. The most important thing I've learned in all the work that I've done is that there's nothing more powerful than people who share values, united in common purpose, fighting for change and social justice. And that's why I think it's possible to get these big ideas done. Here's some of them. So first of all, very early on, after the COVID crisis hit, I said we should have 1 million people in national service. As I mentioned, Sitio was the model for AmeriCorps. I built the coalitions to pass 3 major pieces of legislation. I defeated Tom DeLay when he tried to kill it. I beat Mitch McConnell when he opposed passing this in the first 100 days of the Obama administration. We need to put our young people to work. Unemployment for 18 to 24-year-olds is still 24%. It's at Great Depression levels. It's going to really hit once we get through the summer and young people are looking for jobs who just graduated. We also need them to fight the coronavirus. We need a new public health corps to do contact tracing. We need an education corps to figure out how we're going to educate our kids with this crisis. We need a new climate action corps. We had the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 30s, which came together within 3 months from scratch. We've had more than 25 years of AmeriCorps. We could plant 3 billion trees like they did. We can renovate our parks and playgrounds. We could whitewash our buildings and make them more environmentally sustainable. And we need an opportunity court to fight issues of justice. So that's one. Secondly, I proposed right after the coronavirus hit that we should have emergency wage support, which I still think we need. My proposal was, rather than the convoluted loan program that the Congress passed, I said we should pay people directly 80% of what they were making if they were a small business, a truly small business, not like the big ones that the Trump administration abused this program with, to keep people in their jobs rather than put them on unemployment. And then as we could safely reopen, they could go right back to work. We saw with the PPP program that a lot of women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses get at the money. People who didn't have access to banks to do their loans, or who couldn't risk their small assets where they had a home or whatever to get the loans. So I proposed that. I've also proposed, in response to this racial justice awakening, that we should have an American Truth, Justice, and Reconciliation Commission, chartered by Congress with $50 million, led by moral leaders like my friend Brian Stevenson or Reverend William Barber or Mayor Mitch Landrieu, who was the first to take down the Confederate statues, to travel the country, to hold hearings, to tell the truth, but also have the mandate to propose major reforms, not just in police reform, but criminal justice reform, in public education reform, in public health reform, and in economic justice reform. The average African-American family in our country has assets of $17,000. The average white family has $170,000. In Boston, right next to us here in Brookline, the average black family has $8 in assets. The average white family, $250,000. So I think this commission could help figure out how we make sure that this racial justice awakening leads to major legal policy and cultural change. I proposed that with Reverend Cornell William Brooks, who's the past president of the NAACP. We work closely together, and I'm honored that he's endorsed me in this race. He rarely gets behind a candidate, but he knows my record.
I want to pivot for a few minutes into healthcare. We've been talking about COVID, and certainly there's a tremendous public health and individual healthcare angle. What are your thoughts? I want to make this pretty open, so I want to think about what national healthcare system we ought to have. I want to hear your thoughts on specifics around women's health or other issues related to healthcare. Tell us what you're thinking about for healthcare. It's sort of an open question. What's on your mind?
Sure. Well, Tommy, thank you for that. Again, I grew up in a healthcare family. My mom was a nurse. My dad was a doctor. I've had my own direct, serious experience with healthcare. Our daughter, Maribel, on the third day she was born, the doctors came to us and said, your daughter has a serious heart defect. She's going to need emergency surgery, heart surgery, within 6 weeks. It's the scariest thing that my wife and I have ever been through. Thankfully, we had good health insurance and we had access to Children's Hospital, literally the best in the world. And she had the surgery, she came through it fine. But then at age 13, she started fainting and we went right back to Children's. They said, you know what? She's going to need another emergency surgery. And thank goodness for the Affordable Care Act, which protects pre-existing conditions, because my daughter's going to need procedures for the rest of her life. So I am for universal health care. I'm for Medicare for all who want it. I believe 150 million people have private health insurance. I don't think we should force people to give that up. I think we should give them a choice. I'm for a strong public option with subsidies for people who can't afford it. I suggested that 10 years ago when I first ran for office. I'm also for fully covering reproductive rights for women. I'm for gender equality. I believe that we should repeal the Hyde Amendment. I think that women, low-income women, should have choice just as more affluent women do. I also believe that we need to get the money out of politics. We should be able to negotiate prescription drug costs with the pharmaceutical companies. The government, through Medicare and Medicaid, is the biggest purchaser. But because the lobbyists were in there writing the law, they don't allow us to negotiate. That's crazy. You can get much lower costs from Canada. If we did that, we could save hundreds of billions of dollars, which would enable us to cover everyone with a public option. Finally, I think the COVID crisis is showing us that we have to broaden our understanding of health. The fight has been over making sure everybody has insurance and has access to affordable quality health care. We now have to think more in terms of public health terms. We're seeing this with the coronavirus. It affects everyone. Low-income people, people of color more. And so we also have to think about what is our public health system? How do we move to a system that's more about prevention around issues like diabetes or obesity? How do we teach kids in school good health practices? How do we think about what we do about mental health, which I think should be covered? Our teenagers, I'm the father of a teenager, 60% of teenagers right now are suffering from serious anxiety and depression. And yet a lot of healthcare plans don't cover it. When they do, it's impossible to get the reimbursements. I think we need to take that issue out of the shadows. Similarly, we have to do the same thing with the opioid crisis. So I think there's a lot to do on healthcare. I think the good news is that with the new administration, and again, I think everyone recognizes now that this has to be something that's universal because of this crisis.
Earlier, when you talked about some of the protest marches before 2020, really the ones that sprung up immediately after Donald Trump was elected president, you mentioned March for Our Lives and gun safety. And I know that you've been thinking about that a little bit. We've got some time. Tell us where we should be moving on gun safety and how it's going to happen, right? There's been conversations, and I remember in 1994 with the Brady bill, and I wasn't very old then. And it doesn't seem like there's been a lot of movement since then, a lot of talk. How are you going to cut through the talk and get some movement on this issue, and where should it be going?
Thank you, Tom. I was very involved with March for Our Lives. Those young people are heroes. They stood up after that horrible tragedy on Valentine's Day and said, enough with thoughts and prayers, we need action. They announced a national march. I got involved, leveraging the learning I did, building the Sister March Network, helping to build what we call the Sibling March Network. 800 marches, over 2 million people all over this country, even around the world. And I've been working with them. So here's what I would do. And this is something that I learned to do building the service movement. First of all, if I get elected to Congress, I want to launch a nonstop people's filibuster for gun safety. When Tom DeLay tried to kill the AmeriCorps program in 2003, I came up with this idea. I said, you know what? People in Congress don't understand what's happening at the local level. Young people had already signed up to serve, schools that were relying on those AmeriCorps members. So I said, let's go right inside Congress. Let's do 100 hours of a hearing. You hold hearings as a state representative. Usually they're an hour or 2 hours, maybe 3 hours, maybe 4. I said, let's do 100 hours straight. Let's stay up all night. So it's dramatic. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning. And then people went and lobbied their members of Congress, and that 80% funding cut turned into a 50% increase. And we saved the Corporation for National Service, $1 billion agency, and now 1.1 million people have had a chance to serve through AmeriCorps. I want to do the same thing for gun safety. If I'm elected, one of the first things I'll do is pull together the other members of Congress who are passionate about this issue, but also bring together March for Our Lives, who I know. The Every Town for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action, and I'm honored that I've been endorsed as a gun sense candidate by those groups, the Giffords organization, the Brady group, and say, okay, folks, let's launch a nonstop hearing. Only I don't want to put a limit on it of 100 hours. I want to keep going and going and going until we win. I've already figured out that with the help of those groups, now mind you, 2 million people did March for Our Lives. If we could get 50,000 people to sign up, we can go round the clock, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day for a year. Now, we won't have to do that because the most powerful device for change on the planet is this. We can now live stream it. We can put it on Zoom. We can have public access television, like in Brookline, live stream it. And we can, if Mitch McConnell's still in power, or if there are other Republicans who are in the pocket of the NRA, we can have their phone numbers streaming across the bottom and say, call their offices and shut them down. And because 80% of us agree on a package of reasonable gun safety measures, things we've already done here in Massachusetts, like universal background checks and red flag laws. We should ban assault weapons, high capacity magazines. I can't wait to do this. My son was 4 and my daughter was 10 when the horrible tragedy in Newtown happened. And I thought to myself, what if somebody, crazy person with an assault rifle, went into the Lincoln School and started shooting at my kids and my friends' kids? So I honestly believe this could work. I've done it before. I have the skills to organize it. And we can break the back of the NRA. We can break the back of Mitch McConnell. We can get this done. I believe it.
Alan, your website, alankhazei.com, has got conversation around all kinds of issues we won't have a chance to get to. But I do want to spend a few minutes and talk about the district, right? And so we tend to think about issues a lot, and these issues, by and large, are national issues. And, our national government needs to be focused on them. But every district has someone who speaks just for them. So tell us your thoughts about the 4th Congressional District and how you imagine you will represent the unique, interesting, unusual, important needs of this area, which runs from Brookline over and down to Fall River.
Well, Tommy, thank you. I love this district. It's a historic district. It's a very diverse district socioeconomically, culturally, and Brookline and Newton are very different from Fall River and Taunton. Fall River and Taunton remind me of Catania, Pennsylvania, where my Italian family's from, which was an industrial giant like they were in the 20th century because of the coal mines where my great-grandfather worked, the steel mills, the factories. But they haven't been brought into the 21st century economy, and I'm really committed to doing that. In fact, I'm doing something I think that's very unique of anybody running in this race. I have put together a plan for the district. This was inspired by another one of my mentors, Paul Songas, who led the effort to turn around Lowell after he got elected. And what I'm doing is I've been talking to hundreds of voters and leaders like you to get their ideas as to what are the unique assets, because I believe in building off the strengths of Taunton, of Franklin, of Fall River, of Seekonk, of Attleboro, of Brookline, of Newton, etc. And then what are the unique local challenges? Because I believe in a New Deal moment, things are going to move fast. We're going to have another 100 days with President Biden. I think we're going to have an infrastructure bill, for example. I want to be ready. I don't want to have to take the time as a new member of Congress to say, what do we need? So, for example, I learned in talking to residents of Franklin and your colleague, Representative Jeff Roy, who's supporting me, which I'm honored by, that the big issue there, and I've had lunch right there, is the commuter rail stop is not ADA compliant. And so there's an effort to bring a second commuter line in, but you can't bring it all the way to the station because there isn't the funds to make it ADA compliant. So it almost defeats the purpose in terms of accelerating traffic. When there's an infrastructure bill, I want to work to put an amendment to say, let's use the money to make all of these facilities ADA compliant. That was a mandate from the federal government. Well, the federal government should pay for it, and then we could bring that second line in. I remember talking with you about what we could do with signal crossing. We could accelerate bus lanes, and you're right. And this is an issue across the district, climate change. The fastest thing we could do to mitigate climate change is have more buses, bus-dedicated lanes, but signal crossing so that people realize if I ride the bus, I'm actually going to get to my destination faster than if I drive my car. Again, the federal government in an infrastructure bill should pay for that signal crossing, which is also a climate change action thing. I've learned as I've traveled across the district that while the response to the coronavirus has had funding for some things, there's no funding for arts and culture. And so the Black Box Theater in Franklin, the new cultural center in Taunton. I love your idea as we rebuild the Pierce School. Why not make that theater a cultural center for the town? Well, that's something that the federal government could provide funding for, which will be resources for everybody. So I'm putting together this plan. I've talked to hundreds of voters in doing it, and I think it's unique in this race, and I will be ready to be able to seize the moment, to deliver for the people of the 4th districts. That's my first responsibility if I have the privilege of serving.
Alan, we've got about a minute left, so we've got an opportunity for some last words. What would you like to say in the last minute that you didn't get an opportunity for before now?
First of all, it's great to be with you. I would be honored to have the support of people of Brookline. This is my hometown, and all across this district. There are a lot of good candidates. I think the difference for me is I'm the only candidate that has actually been able to tap this movement energy to get major legislation through Congress and deliver jobs, volunteers, service across the district, across Massachusetts and the country. That's a skill set that I believe I can bring that's different. And I'd be honored to have people's support. I do think this is the most important election of our lifetimes. And if we seize the opportunity, we can close this very dark chapter and get to a bright new day.
Alan, I know you're so busy, so I want to thank you for spending some time with us on Brookline Interactive Group. And I want to remind voters across the district and really across the state, we have a primary September 1st, the first Tuesday in September. You can vote by mail, but you're running out of time. So if you haven't applied for that mail-in ballot, you need to do it immediately. And as soon as you get that ballot, you better fill it out and send it back. You can still vote in person. That remains your right. And if you feel more comfortable voting in person, that's how you should do it on September 1st. And then repeat that exercise Tuesday, November 3rd. Right, September 1st, November 3rd, back to back. It's our modern day doubleheader. Elections are critical. This one, I agree with Alan, is maybe the most critical one in our lifetime. So I encourage you to vote. Once again, thank you, Alan, for joining us. Thank you, Brookline Interactive Group, for hosting. This is Representative Tommy Vitolo thanking you for watching. Have a great one.